Welcome back, Capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today we are going over our previews and predictions for Week 3 of the 2024 college football season. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy it. And just as a reminder, we have our $100 giveaway going on for the season. Our season predictions are on the line. We got to get 75% or higher. So be sure to follow us on our social medias for a chance to win. And without further ado, let's jump into some games to watch. Tonight we have UNLV at Kansas. This is going to be a very underrated matchup going into Week 3. These are two high-powered offenses going at it. And Kansas looked very vulnerable against the run last week versus Illinois, and surprisingly did not pass the ball very well. And on the counter, UNLV has a great rushing attack. I believe they've run the ball on over 70% of their plays so far, and they've already shown they can punch up in their win over Houston in Week 1. Like we said, very interesting how those teams match up against each other. But for the Saturday slate, let's start with West Virginia at Pitt. West Virginia is a team that's gotten out of the gate a bit slow to start this season. Not a great performance against Penn State in Week 1, but it is Penn State, and a better but still not amazing performance against Albany in Week 2. And their biggest strength will absolutely be their running game. It has been the best part of this West Virginia team so far, but Pitt has been able to stop the run to a very high degree so far. And opposite to West Virginia, they've gotten off to a very good start this season, albeit against two not great teams in Cincinnati and Kent State. Next, we have Texas A&M at Florida. This game is going to be a very important one for both of these programs. If you're A&M, you need this one to show you are at least a step above the bottom tier of the SEC. And if you're Florida, every game is make or break the rest of the way, especially against an SEC opponent. And it looks like Billy Napier is going with DJ Lagway over Graham Mertz. We don't blame him. If the team was a lot better all around, Mertz would be a much safer option, but they desperately need a spark, and Lagway showed he has the potential to provide that both through the air and with his feet. And on the flip side, A&M is in a much better position in this one than Florida. Just don't give Florida free possessions. Play how you've been playing, and you should be dictating how the game goes. Next, we have Tulane at Oklahoma. Tulane just took Kansas State to the wire, but they're going to have a much bigger task at hand going to Norman and taking down the Sooners, but it's not impossible, obviously. Houston went out and nearly did it last week. They came up just short in a sloppy battle in Norman. And if Tulane can find a way to make this game a dogfight, just like they did last week, they absolutely stand a fighting chance here. But if you're Oklahoma, all you have to do is play clean, feed your backs the ball, and have Jackson Arnold make a few big plays with his arm. The home crowd's going to be behind him, and you should be golden here. Next, we have the App State Mountaineers taking on the ECU Pirates. This is our group of 5 game of the week. ECU is a team that's gone off to a surprisingly okay start to the 2024 season. And last week they went out and beat a competent Old Dominion team despite throwing 4 interceptions. There were 6 total turnovers in that game, very sloppy on both sides, and App State also did not look a lot better in their game versus Clemson. They had just over 360 total yards, but had 3 turnovers in that game to go along with it. And while both of these teams have looked a bit sloppy to start the year, they've shown that when they're on, they can go out and win a football game, which is very exciting. If both teams go out and play clean, it should be a great game. And on the contrary, if both teams go out and turn the ball over 3 or 4 times, it should make for a very fun game to watch. Next, we have UCF at TCU. Both of these teams have started out 2-0. TCU has the best win of those 4 games in Week 1 at Stanford. And this is going to be the biggest litmus test for both teams so far. UCF's rush offense has looked like one of the better units in the country so far, between RJ Harvey, Penny Boone, Miles Montgomery, and even the quarterback KJ Jefferson. They have looked dominant so far on the ground. They average over 380 yards on the ground per game. Keep in mind that that is against much inferior competition, but still very impressive. And for the Horned Frogs of TCU, they've been the opposite. Most of their offense has come through the air, and for that, we think this one has barn burner written all over it. Neither defense looks outstanding, so we imagine TCU will have a hard time stopping the three-headed monster of a running back room that UCF has. And we think Josh Hoover could go out and have a day against the UCF secondary. And last in our games to watch, we have Colorado going to Colorado State. We know Colorado just got stomped versus Nebraska, but that makes this game even more interesting to us. Nebraska heavily outmatched Colorado last week, but this week should be a good bit more balanced, especially because the Colorado State lines, both offensively and defensively, are nowhere near as good as Nebraska's, but still pretty okay. So Sanders should have a much easier time getting the ball to his receivers this week, but for Colorado State, they have a pretty good rushing attack, and if they learned anything from the game last week, it should be that the way to beat Colorado is by working them in the trenches, which is something we believe the Rams are more than capable of doing. And moving into our big impact matchups, tonight we have the 20th ranked Arizona Wildcats taking on the 14th ranked Kansas State Wildcats. This game happens tonight and we are pumped to watch this one. It's going to be two pretty solid contenders in the Big 12 going at it, and it's just week 3. Plenty more of those to come, and these two teams just match up great against one another. We could see it going either way. For Arizona, Noah Fafita is going to have to keep his foot on the gas. He's looked great so far, and we can say the same thing for his number one target, Teteroa McMillan. That duo could take this team very far, and same for the rushing attack. Arizona has been a pass primary team thus far, but their rushing attack has not looked bad. They've been very complimentary to Fafita's game. They're showing good signs early on this year. And for Kansas State, it's more of the same. Avery Johnson has been very reliable for the Wildcats, but they haven't been able to identify a top receiver quite yet, which could actually lend to Kansas State's advantage. But they are probably going to lean on their run game against the Wildcats, and rightfully so. Arizona's rush defense hasn't been bad, but it's definitely looked like the weaker of the two units on that side, and Kansas State's rushing attack has been top 10 in the nation so far in terms of yards per attempt. And moving on, we have Memphis at Florida State. Well. The 0-2 Florida State Seminoles host the 2-0 Memphis Tigers. And we just know Florida State fans' stomachs are in knots for this one. They're coming off a bye week, and hopefully they've got some of their most glaring holes fixed, or at least duct taped, because this matchup is going to be more of the same for them. Memphis is very similar to Georgia Tech in that they have a good quarterback and a very effective run game. Something Seminoles fans absolutely do not want to hear, but it is the truth. And the biggest thing for Florida State this season is either finding a way to scheme around the weaknesses of DJ Uiagalelei. We know that's easier said than done, or just flat out ending the DJ experiment in its tracks. They have Brock Glenn behind him, who didn't look terrible in his performances last year when Jordan Travis got hurt. Could go to him if DJ starts off the game very unproductive. It just has not worked out the way they intended with him. They need a big change, and they need it soon. And next we have the 16th ranked LSU Tigers going to Columbia to take on the South Carolina Gamecocks. This matchup is going to be one of the most hyped of this week just because of how dominant South Carolina's defensive front looked versus Kentucky last week. And that should be very scary for a team like LSU that has had a surprisingly one-dimensional offense so far this year. There's no real semblance of a run game there. They've really been leaning on Garrett Nussmeier to lead them thus far, which could be bad news if South Carolina can play exactly how they've been playing. They've been able to get pressure on quarterbacks, haven't allowed a lot of time for opposing quarterbacks to stay in the pocket, and have been able to force turnovers at a noticeable rate. And LSU has to be able to put together a decent performance on the ground in this game if they want to keep South Carolina on their toes. Either way should be a great battle, and another SEC team that could find themselves in a battle this week is the Missouri Tigers. They host the 24th ranked Boston College Eagles. And here's the deal. We know exactly who Boston College is. They're going to have a prolific and dynamic rushing attack with Thomas Castellanos providing a decent throwing talent at quarterback. But opposite to them, we don't know for sure what Missouri will be. They've looked great all around against much inferior competition. But the biggest thing for them, and something they are more than capable of doing, is slowing down that run offense. We think Missouri will be able to control the pace of this one as long as they don't pull a Florida State and just forget how to defend the rushing attack. And we think that offense will be much more spread out and just plain better overall than the Seminoles was. We like Missouri a lot in this one. Following that, we have the 9th ranked Oregon Ducks going on the road to face the Oregon State Beavers. The Civil War, what a great rivalry this has been over the last few years. The series is tied 2-2 since 2020, and we think it'll be interesting once again. Oregon has gotten off to a bit of a shaky start this season, scraping out 2 wins against what should be much inferior opponents. Boise State's really good. We don't want to say much inferior, but Idaho definitely should have been a bigger win there. And unfortunately for them, their weaknesses have been exposed a bit already this year. They've shown they're decently one-dimensional on offense. We say decently because they do have 2 pretty solid running backs, but for the amount that they run the ball, they've been relatively inefficient. They're top 30 in rushing play percentage, yet only 90th in rushing yards per attempt. And they've shown they are more than willing to give up a lot of yards on the ground. They're towards the bottom of the country in rushing yards allowed per attempt, and you can primarily thank Ashton Jeanty for that. But Oregon State has a very good run offense. They're going to be able to get a few gut punches in, however, not great in either pass defense nor pass offense. So Oregon will be able to gain yards there, and it could end badly for the Beavers if Oregon is able to focus in on that rushing attack in this one. Following that, we have a neutral site game, and it is the Apple Cup. It's Washington State versus Washington. Another great rivalry game. The Huskies have been able to take this one all but 2 times since 2010, but this one is going to be a bit more interesting. Washington State has looked very good both through the air and on the ground on offense so far. They had a pretty impressive win over Texas Tech last week. The biggest thing for them is going to be stopping the pass. They've allowed just under 290 yards through the air on average so far this season, which is not great, especially since you're playing a Washington team led by Will Rogers, who has looked amazing so far. They've also been able to scrape together an incredibly efficient rush offense. They ran the ball on just under 50% of their plays, but were able to scrounge together nearly 7.5 yards on each of those attempts so far. Absolutely phenomenal numbers there. This game could go down to the wire, and we love to see this rivalry continuing on in spite of conference realignment. And for your O&O Sports Game of the Week, this week you voted, and it is the number 4 Alabama Crimson Tide going to Camp Randall Stadium to play the Wisconsin Badgers. And Wisconsin has managed a 2-0 start to the 2024 season despite not looking amazing in those games. The stats will be popping up on your screen, so you'll be able to see that for yourself. It seems like Wisconsin is still trying to figure out its true identity under Luke Fickell, and so far it's been run primary as it was under the previous regimes, but they haven't looked particularly great in either facets of the offense so far. Their main strengths are on the opposite side. They've shown the ability to control how the game goes defensively, which is very important for a team like Wisconsin, who probably won't be putting up 40 points a game on people this year, especially not on a team like the Crimson Tide, who have also started off 2-0, but who also struggled a good bit against USF last week. And they have to go to Madison. They're going to come into this one with a much more proficient and efficient rush offense than the Badgers. Alabama runs the ball a lot, and they look very good when they do so. They also have Jalen Milroe as their starting quarterback, who has looked very good so far. Also very efficient with his passes, and the defense is going to be just as good and potentially even better than Wisconsin's will be at controlling the pace of the game. And our players to watch for this one are going to be the Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe, and for Wisconsin, we'll highlight the safety Hunter Waller, who has been dominating in the open field the past couple years. If anyone can contain Milroe or limit his options down the field, it's gonna be him. He is a true capital F football player. And moving on to Upset Watch, we have Todd joining us. Everybody say hi to Todd. Go ahead, he'll get angry if you don't. Thank you. And we're starting off with the 18th ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They go to Purdue, who is a 9.5 point underdog in this one. We think this one speaks for itself. Purdue looked very good against a very bad FCS opponent, but Northern Illinois showed us last week that the talent level isn't going to matter as much if you can just play A+ football, or as we like to call it, capital F football. But we've yet to see Purdue do so under Ryan Walters, so it'll be a matter of seeing it to believe it for us. But for Todd, he has this one in the hot level at an 8 out of 10. Very scary stuff for Notre Dame early on. They'll need a statement win here to take them out of upset territory going further. Next, we have the 15th ranked Oklahoma Sooners taking on Tulane in Norman. Tulane's going to be a 13.5-point underdog. And like we said earlier, Tulane's going to be able to take it to anyone this season. They did it last week against Kansas State. And Oklahoma is a very similar team to the Wildcats. They're going to have to beat Tulane in a very similar style, but they'll have the home field advantage, unlike Kansas State did last week, which is most likely why Todd has this game at a 5 out of 10 on the upset scale, much lower than he had last week's matchup. And the last upset alert team is going to be the Virginia Tech Hokies. They travel to Old Dominion to take on the Monarchs. Old Dominion is a 13.5-point underdog as well, but the Hokies have looked a bit disappointing to start the year. They bounced back last week versus Marshall, but a lot of the same vulnerabilities we saw in week 1 were still there last week, like their susceptibility to give up big chunk plays on the ground. And while Old Dominion hasn't looked especially great on the ground, we think their week 1 performance against South Carolina shows they are able to hold their own against teams that are superior to them on paper. And with that said, Todd isn't nearly as worried for the Hokies as we are. He has this game at a 3 out of 10 in the cool zone. And moving on, let's jump right into our predictions for this week. Here are all of our big impact matchups. You'll see them on the screen now, starting with Arizona at Kansas State. Like we said, very excited to watch this one. The Noah Fafita Tataroa McMillan connection is one of the best we've seen to this point of the season, but we think Kansas State's ability to play balanced, efficient football both ways is what will give them the edge in this one. We have the Wildcats of Kansas State taking the W over the Wildcats of Arizona, 31-27. Next, for Memphis at Florida State. Seminoles fans, we really wish we could say this game being at home could be the difference maker for the Seminoles, but that obviously didn't matter last week. And Memphis's run game, like Georgia Tech and Boston College's before it, is very efficient and explosive. The biggest factor in this game will be if Memphis can stop the run and give DJ no easy targets for big gains, and we think that's what will happen. We have the Memphis Tigers going over the Florida State Seminoles in an upset 24-21. Florida State starts off 0-3. And next, we have LSU going to South Carolina. Brian Kelly's Tigers have looked unfocused for a good portion of the season to date. We think that'll play the biggest role in LSU's team overall. We thought there would be a lot of improvement after week 1, and for the most part there was, but we think LSU could be their own downfall this season, especially when they go up against a team that won't let them get anything for free. South Carolina's defense has looked great so far, and we think they'll be able to get to Garrett Nussmeier more than any team has so far, and that's going to be the big difference maker in this one. We have South Carolina beating LSU at home 16-13. Following that, we have Boston College at Missouri. Boston College has already exceeded our expectations this season. They have played very great team-oriented football. We cannot be happier for them, but they just do not match up well against Missouri. They're not a team that's going to give up 250 yards on the ground like a Florida State before them, and adversely, their offense is a lot better all around than any team Boston College has played so far. We don't think this game will be very close. We have Missouri winning 35-14. Next, we have Oregon at Oregon State. We love rivalry matchups like this. A lot of bad blood between these teams, and they're never going to make for an easy prediction, so not quite sure why we decided to have 2 of them in our prediction this week, but who doesn't love a challenge? And I'll tell you, Trent Bray absolutely does love a challenge. He's going to have his guys fired up. They know what the game plan is, and they should be able to execute it, but we like Oregon here overall. They're going to outmatch the Beavers outside, going both ways, and we think Oregon will be able to hone in on that rushing attack, and while we don't think they'll shut it down, we think they won't let them get out in space as much as Boise State did. We have the Ducks taking the victory on the road, 35-21. And after that, we have the Apple Cup. Washington versus Washington State in Seattle, another big rivalry, and we think the biggest difference maker here will be Will Rogers. He is phenomenal, and while me and Todd both like what we've seen from Washington State so far, we think that pass defense is what will do them in this one. just not a great unit from what we've seen so far, and that's why we have the Huskies going over the Cougars 41-28. And for the O&O Sports Game of the Week, Alabama going to Wisconsin. We do think the matchup here is fairly interesting. We think one of these teams has the clear edge here, and we think that team is Alabama. They're going to have the superior rushing attack. We'd probably give their defense the edge overall. Maybe not the O-line, but for sure the quarterback. We think Milroe will be Wisconsin's kryptonite here. They're not a defense that's going to be able to shut down a guy like Milroe. Wisconsin is going to be more focused on the running back rushing tandem, and they'll probably play decent in pass coverage as well, but Milroe is just too slippery and he'll inevitably be able to find a guy or two down the field. Wisconsin could keep it interesting early on. We could see the score being something like 14-14 at the half, but inevitably we think Alabama will pull away. We think they'll outpace the Badgers in the long run. We have the Crimson Tide winning this one 30-16. And that's going to wrap it up for this video. As always, like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and be sure to watch the Week 3 recap. Should be coming out this Monday. Thank you for watching, and we will see you there.